Here we go at this 3 o'clock hour, and join ESPN college basketball analyst, former Duke star Jay Bilas. Did the game between Baylor and West Virginia on another night in the Big 12 where everybody had to avoid haymakers. Some did better than others. Jay, thank you very much for being a part of the show. What was the grittiness that you saw? Hell of a game yesterday in Morgantown, but the grittiness at Baylor was able to survive coming off what was that tough 2-game losing streak.
Yeah, just a really, I thought, tough performance by Baylor when there was a lot of adversity, not having James Akinjo, not having Jeremy Sohan, and then going into a difficult environment at West Virginia and pulling out a win. I was really impressed with how, Baylor handled pressure, and it wasn't just one guy. It was everybody taking pretty good care of the ball. And, Adam Flagler, LJ Pryor, Matthew Meyer, all did a really good job. And their big guys did a good job. I really thought the game honestly kind of changed when Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua came in the first half. Baylor turned it over, I think, the first 2 times they had the ball, including a guard-to-guard pass they just threw out of bounds. And you're kind of thinking this is going to be a long night if this is the way it's starting. But everyday John, kind of his energy and, how hard he rolls to the basket, his defensive intensity kind of lifted everything. And I don't think Baylor really looked back after that. So playing with the lead was important. I think if you're in that environment playing from behind, that would have been a serious uphill climb. But I think they showed a lot about their athletic character to go into that. And look, I don't want to overstate it. I don't think West Virginia is a great team, but they're good. And they're really good. They can be really good there at West Virginia. So that was a really, really good win for Baylor.
Jay, they obviously don't know when they're going to get James Akinjo back. It could be this weekend. It could be another couple games with that back injury. How do you feel that they navigated without having a true point guard?
Really well. And look, you don't want this to be a long-term thing, but my sense is it's a tailbone injury. I don't know the extent of it, but whether it's 1 or 2 more games, whatever, you don't want to rush it back because the long-term is far more important than the short-term. And, this isn't football. If you lose a game, you're out. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. So I think you want to be careful with both those guys. If I remember right, Sohan's an ankle, but both of them will be back. And the good news is I think they'll probably come back to a better team than they left. There's sometimes when you face this kind of adversity from a personnel deficit that guys step forward and do really well and gain confidence from it. And my sense is that's the way it'll be with Baylor. You see it every day, but one of the great things about that program, among the great things, are players will they'll play a certain role in a given year or a given time period, but that's not necessarily who they are. They're able to bust out of those roles if they have to. And I don't think I don't know who would have predicted it, but I don't think anybody was sitting here saying LJ Cryer is going to turn into this, and he has. And Flagler's, he was a double-figure scorer last year off the bench, but both those guys have stepped into expanded roles and have done so really successfully. And it's just a great program, and I couldn't have been more impressed with the way they handle themselves in a difficult situation.
Jay, now that we've seen a little bit of them with full strength, without full strength, and just kind of seen how these last couple of weeks have gone, has it changed at all your view of where they kind of stand pound for pound in the rest of the college basketball landscape?
I think Baylor's competitive with the best teams in the country. It's a different year than last year. Last year, I felt like Gonzaga and Baylor were kind of head and shoulders above, and the only thing that kept Baylor from being undefeated going into the tournament was COVID. I had Baylor's game at Kansas last year after the team went through that COVID bout, and you could tell they weren't themselves. They're gasping for air, and Kansas wound up beating them. And I had said, I think multiple times during the broadcast, I was like, look, this isn't the Baylor team we've seen. This is the COVID Baylor team. And of course, Kansas fans clap back saying, oh, quit making excuses. We're the better team. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're not. But you say what you think and let the chips fall where they may. But they proved it. It was Gonzaga and Baylor. And I that's one of the downsides of college basketball is, that should have been a 5 or 7 game series. Like that was an NBA caliber matchup, and I think it would have gone multiple games. I think it would have gone to the mat if they could play each other over and over again. But since it was a 1 game series, Baylor just dominated.
Jay, Matthew Meyer is he's a unique individual, unique player as well, and he had to lift his game up yesterday, and he did that in Morgantown a year ago when Baylor needed a win coming off that loss you were talking about to Kansas. He seems to feed off of it in Morgantown. He's kind of had to change who he is, not just from being a guy that could shoot it like what you say, Paul, like a rapid fire or whatever, but he then became a better defensive player, and now he's trying to become like a leader as well. What did you see from him rise up yesterday when they needed him as well?
Well, not to parse words, but I don't think he needed to change who he is. I think he just needs to show who he is.
Okay.
And he he's got that capability. I mean, last year he was somebody that blended in with, kind of the marquee guys that were the load carriers. So he wasn't, he might have been the 4th guy on the scouting report. Now he's 1 or 2. And so he's being guarded a little bit differently. And, I've been watching that ESPN Plus thing, Our Time, which is really good. And I heard him say he wanted to be Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. And you thought, well, that's a little bit of a stretch. He's got a ways to go to get there. But just the fact that he wants to do that, he's willing to, put himself out there on that. I think he has improved defensively. I wouldn't rank him as Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. But I'm impressed that's a mindset of his, and I think it's a really good way to go about things. He's a really good player. I think he's going to play in the NBA because he can, he's got size and he can stretch the floor, and he's unafraid. I mean, I remember Scott Drew telling me one time, maybe it was 2 years ago, you're kind of drawn to Meyer's personality a little bit. He comes into the game, or at least he did then, and he always struck me as kind of a wild card. Like he could go off for 20 points, or he could take some shot, you're scratching your head and it hits the shot clock. But when I remember Scott Drew telling me the knock on him in high school was he was too passive, and I've never forgotten that. Like that, like somebody thought he was too passive, but he's certainly broken out of that. He's a great young man. I mean, we had him on after the game. He had 20 points. He played great. And all that. It could have been him or Cryer for the post game interview. But I couldn't help it. After we asked him the obligatory first question about the game, I had to go to the mullet, and I said, the mullet, had to help you in this game. And he said, yeah, I looked up in the crowd, I saw a bunch of mullets. I thought this was my hometown, and I could not stop laughing. I mean, the personality of those guys is so great.
Yeah, he's got a little Nuke LaLoosh in him for sure, Jay. With the rest of the Big 12 and the way that this league is just a rolling ball of butcher knives every night, how do you see it shaking out? I mean, I know Baylor's at the top, Kansas at the top. Do you think there's other teams that can hang with them down the stretch?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's a question of overall consistency. So, like, Baylor and Kansas are both going to lose games in conference play. That's going to happen. It's basketball. It's not football. So, and football would have the same amount of losses if they played the same amount of games. You extrapolate out football results over a 30 some game season, and they're going to lose the same amount of games. But what I think is really interesting about the league, I think the Big 12 and the SEC, maybe you throw the Big 10, those are the best leagues in the country, in my view. So. The one thing that has been disappointing to me is how the Big 12 is being officiated this year. The games are way too physical, and the officials are letting it go. And like, just for an example, I mean, how is it that Baylor and West Virginia can play, and at the end of the game, West Virginia has to foul because they haven't had enough fouls to get in the bonus? That's impossible. And you guys saw the game. Yep. I mean, it was a hockey game. And the officials are letting everything go. So you give the players credit for playing through contact and dealing with it. None of them complain. They just play. But the cliche that we use is, well, the officials are letting them play. Like, no, they're not. They're letting them foul. And the only way that we're going to get clean games is if the officials call fouls. And oddly enough, when officials call fouls on clear fouls, players stop fouling. And if they don't call them, they foul more. And, I think it's a shame because these guys are super skilled. And look, reasonable minds can differ on this as to what you prefer, but I would rather watch two good teams play an 85-84 game than watch them play a 61-60 game. Mm-hmm. And an example would be that Kansas-Oklahoma game last night. Like that game should not have been played in the 60s. Those teams are good. That game should have been in the 70s or 80s, and that's because of officiating. But that might be a 30,000-foot view of things. But that's my only disappointment with the Big 12 or the SEC is these games are ridiculously physical. And look, I don't expect normal fans to do this, but I do it. You go back and you watch games from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when people said, boy, the game was much more physical back then. No, it wasn't. It was way less physical. And the difference in the game 20-some years ago was we didn't have flagrant fouls. So when you fouled somebody, you got your money's worth and you put them in the wood. And that's been eliminated. But the contact off the ball, dribble handoffs, ball screen defense, those are fouls. And guys driving to the basket, they're getting hand checked and arm bars on them. It's wrong. And I can sit down with all these officials and I can watch film with them and say, foul or no foul. And they'd have no excuse for not calling it. But nobody holds their feet to the fire.
Jay, Texas Tech had the loss to Iowa State, I guess, a couple weeks ago, but then reeled off wins against Kansas and Baylor, then beat Iowa State last night. Did have the loss as well to K-State, which I guess is an example of just the toughness of the Big 12. But how impressed have you been by Mark Adams and the Red Raiders?
Really good. They're excellent defensively. They're a little bit like Baylor in the way they guard. It's a no middle kind of down ball screens, ice them, all that stuff. So they're very difficult to score upon. Their help side is really good, and they really swarm to the ball. They rebound pretty well. And now that they've got Terrence Shannon back, Terrence Shannon Jr., that gives them a primary scorer, so they can put up more points. But they make it really difficult to play against them. So it's hard to run anything. So I think sometimes in those Big 12 games that become kind of slugfests, that's where, if you have players that can make individual plays and break off of your offense, it's really tough to run offense against these better defensive teams because of the physicality that I'm talking about. So you wind up having guys making individual plays. So the guys that the teams that have playmakers, and Baylor's one of those, have a better opportunity to consistently win at the highest level.
Jay, I know you got to go. L.J. Cryer was one of the all-time greatest scorers in Texas high school basketball history, which has produced a bunch of stars, as you know. A guy that's kind of taken his time, waited his turn like Flagler had to do, like others have had to do. Your thoughts about L.J. Cryer, who really played well Saturday in the loss to Oklahoma State, and what he brings to the table?
He's just a really good player. He handles the ball well. He moves without it well, and he's got really good footwork. So, he always seems to be shot ready, and he's got a variety of different shots that he can go to. He's an excellent jump shooter, but some of the shots that he made, floaters, getting in the lane, and his shot creativity is really good. So your point is really good about kind of the wait your turn thing. Oftentimes, you have better players ahead of you that are older and established. Doesn't mean you can't play. He played a role last year, and this year, and frankly didn't play at times all that much. But he was patient. He knew the team he was playing on, and this year his role has expanded, and he's shown that he has the game to match up to it. He's really an impressive player.
Jay, thank you as always. You've always been gracious to be a part of our show. Thank you so much. Appreciate your work.
Looking forward to getting back to Waco, guys. Thanks for having me.
Can't wait to get you here. Jay Bilas, ESPN college basketball analyst. How about the comment about Matthew Meyer? He didn't need to what was I did put it up on Twitter, the quote from him. Dang it. I just put it up and I lost it on there. That's okay. He needed to show who he was, not change who he was. He needed to show who he was. His thoughts about LG. I agree with him as well, guys, about Jonathan Chalmers-Chachua, who seems to have, he's not going to give you 10, 12 points. He's not going to sometimes give you 5 or 6. It's his energy on both ends of the court and how he runs the court that was what that jumped out on the screen last year.
It's the Mark Vidal bull in a china shell. I mean,
Yes.
he's a little smoother than Mark was, especially early on. I mean, Mark was a disruptor, someone who was just going to, all right, there's the ball. There's 3 guys between me and that ball. Sorry about you, 3 guys. It's gonna get muddy in here, but he's the energy guy. He's the guy who comes in and gives the energy, and he's growing in that role. I think he needs a little bit more offense sometimes because his dunks kind of spur them on emotionally, but. I mean, he is the energy guy.
It was a fast break that he got a bounce pass. I forgot who it was from, Flagler, Cryer, whoever, where he went in for a jam and Bilas went nuts. That's kind of the energy he brings to the table. Craig, you actually picked up the quote, right? The quote was, he didn't need to change who he is. He just needed to show who he is. And the quote from Matthew Meyer we had earlier, thank you, Armstrong, also about the fact that to Adam Flagler about you're the best shooter on the team other than me, but also the one where he gave Bilas the quote. I looked up in the stands and I saw a lot of people with mullets and thought I was in my hometown. He is, you can say that. Home planet.
I mean, he said hometown, but I'm correcting him. It's home planet.
He can say that, but it's good to say it after a loss because otherwise those quotes aren't even there. So that was gutsy. And at one point, up 16, and then what was it, Paul? They got down, Craig, 5, 6, 7 points in that game. Adam Flagler gave you a couple of critical threes down the stretch. There was also a play offensively on a rebound or a pass into Flo Thamba, who does struggle at times with his hands. And he went up and scored. I saw Ashley Hodge highlight that as well. But overall, a huge win for Baylor.
Everybody always says Matthew Meyer needs to slow down. Matthew Meyer needs to stop shooting as much. Matthew Meyer, I'm with Jay Bilas. He just needs to be who he is. I mean, that's when he's at his best. So, yeah, he can be a little out of control. He can be a little foolish maybe with some of his shot selection, but I mean that's ultimately the player that he is. So I think the brilliant part about Jay Bilas' quote is that's right on the money. He needs to be Matthew Meyer. He doesn't need to be Matthew Meyer trying to be a different Matthew Meyer, if that makes sense. And I think that's spot on because I do think there's been this call or feeling like he needs to turn into somebody that he's not. Well, what's the point of then go get somebody else who's like that to begin with, because Matthew Meyer's not just some other guy. He's pretty unique in many ways. So there's not just a lot of him growing on trees. And why would you want to turn a unicorn into just another horse? You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Why would you want to do that? And I feel like that's kind of the mindset sometimes. Is like, no, blend in. It's like, no, but he's a unicorn. He's not another one of the herd. So that's kind of how I view it. And yeah, good to hear Jay Bilas. He's great when it comes to college hoops and even talking the NCAA sometimes. He is no fan. And he's been championing that for a long time, and one of the few that's been doing it for as long as he's been doing it and has been as adamant about it as he is. So I do appreciate him for that as well.
Well, and he's a lawyer, too, so he brings a perspective of it. When Jay Bilas talks about the NCAA, he's not just saying fundamentally these things are wrong. He's saying fundamentally these things are wrong, and I'll tell you why, and I'll compare it to the rest of the world in America or the rest of life in America and why this isn't right.
Dave Aranda, we've seen Jim